I've seen them done in all kinds of ways, up to including I've had them use the circle irrigation systems, where I subdivide it into a pie shape, and the water is in the center, and everybody has access to it, but closed off from other sections of the growth area. So yeah, I mean, there's just all kinds of creative ways you can do this, and you just have to trial and error it a little bit.
Hey, it's Shaye, and you're listening to Casual Cattle Conversations, the podcast for cattle producers to explore new ideas that will help improve their overall management practices. Speaking of improving management, I want to encourage you to take a look at the lineup for the Q2 Rancher Mind events. These laid-back Q&A calls are between industry experts and fellow beef producers, and Q2 is all about labor challenges. I mean, we're talking how, when, and where to find the right help, when to integrate new technology onto your operation, and how to become a more efficient manager and leader overall. If you want more information on being a part of these producer-driven conversations, head to the show notes and click the link that'll take you straight to my website. With that, let's hear what our guest has to share with us today. Well, good afternoon, Ray. Once again, great as always to have you on the show. I always tell you and Wes that I need to get you like co-host caps or something because you've been a great part of the show in the past 6 months. I know today we're really going to talk about grazing and kind of specifically kind of dive into some of the rotational grazing aspect and really just kind of give an overview so that cattle producers understand, what do they need to keep in mind as maybe they're doing it again or they're starting it for the first time. So that way they're a little more prepared. And if anything else, it allows all of us up north to think about spring because I think we'd really appreciate that. So thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Shaye. I'm really excited to be here. And gosh, like you said, it's getting close. We had a few good warm days the other day, and I'm thinking about being in the pasture, and things are going to start to grow here pretty quick. And so it's always an exciting time for us in the spring, and we get super busy with all kinds of different things from electric fencing to watering. And the big topic, of course, is the rotational grazing and getting ready for that. And we talk to a lot of folks, and gosh, how do I get started? How do I do this? And we just break it down in simple ways and just say, planning is everything. And when you've got a good set of paddocks or pastures that you're going to subdivide up and move your cattle across, I tell people just to start from the perimeter out. I mean, make sure you've got a great outside perimeter fence that we can attach, subdividing electric fence if you wanted to going across the pasture, and just kind of keep an eye on your their plant growth and making sure that your animals are getting moved in a steady way, and that there's just there's good fresh water available, and planning for that. And but for the folks that are starting out, or just getting a plan put together, we've got a few tips that we could share with you and about how to get going.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about that a little more. So, and I'm asking this because I would like for my family to do a little bit more rotational grazing. We do some, but not as heavy as maybe I would like. But so you talked about, start with the perimeter and work and make sure you have that good perimeter fence.
Yeah.
What are the other components, if you can kind of list them off, for rotational grazing that producers need to keep in mind?
Well, with cattle especially, it doesn't take a whole lot to keep them into a space or a line or an area. One of the main things that we try to key in on, and I know that you've had others on the program that have talked about a good source of fresh water. That's key to it, and making sure that you've got that infrastructure put in place. Now, that can be done in a couple different ways. You can create an alley up the center of a pasture that you can move cattle from one to the next, or you could literally just subdivide them off and keep them in a narrow strip. And with that said, a lot of folks will take water lines down the perimeter fence and then feed into, let's say, a portable waterer or some kind of a watering system that's available to the animals that they can get to while they're on pasture. But moreover, looking at how many animals are you going to graze? what's the history of this pasture and what do you have planted? Making sure that just super conscious about going out and checking the way it's been eaten down. We don't want to get too far down. Obviously, we want to move them at the appropriate time. You don't want to move them too fast or too late, if you will, because it'll just damage the field and damage the plant growth, and you won't have the recovery that you would typically have if you move them more often. So, but yeah, just looking at just the simple tools, a reel, some electric fence posts, and going across a line, getting them in a single line will keep cattle in. Making sure that your energizer that you use for this subdividing is a solar unit, so you don't have to worry about power. You can energize, obviously, a cross fence with a perimeter electric fence if you wanted to. So as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. Obviously, most folks want to keep it as simple as possible. So moving animals across the field shouldn't take a long period of time. And some of the tools that are available, as an example, like I said, you can use just a ring top post to go across the field. You can use a tumble wheel, which I'll in the remarks and at the lower part, I will have a link to a piece called a tumble wheel, and that allows one person. Go ahead.
Tumble wheel. So actually, Neil just shared that as well. He talked about the tumble wheel and your smart fence.
Right. Well, and it's just these were designed to move things fast. I mean, and not put a lot of labor into moving animals across the field. And as he may have mentioned about the tumble wheel, man, you can put these 50 feet apart, these spokes, and as they chink across, you can just pull the line, and the hair, you literally can move, hundreds of feet in just a few minutes. So I think it's about it can't be a daunting task. It has to be a piece where I can do it by myself. I don't have to have a lot of help with it, and just being observant, basically. And after a good rain and some moisture, things are going to come back pretty fast. As I move animals, and the plant growth is cut down by the animals eating and trampled down, it'll recover quicker if you move them a little more often. So we just want to carefully manage this process, and gosh, it can lead to healthy animals. Very economical when you're considering the feed and the fattening up of these animals, because the top part of the plant is the most nutritious part of the plant, and when you get down below, you get into wormer issues and things like that. So you don't want to get them down too far. So just being cognizant of that and understanding plant growth in total.
So you mentioned earlier in that statement, when you're talking about water, how some people potentially fence off lanes, or there are different options for water there. But when we're looking at like paddock or pasture design, is that, I believe it was Jeremy from your team at one point talked about all you need is a graph paper and a pencil, and go to your NRCS office and get those aerial footage or get a drone out there, whatever it takes. Is that what you recommend, or do you have other tips for that? Like what do producers need to consider as they, is it how do they make these designs? How do they know how big to make them? Like, what do they need to be going through in their mind and writing down to figure out what's going to work for them and their schedule?
Well, and to your point about NRCS, they have a great resource of how to design a paddock and how many animals should be put on, acreage and such. But, the aerial photograph of your place is so dynamic and so easy to kind of understand the sections of your property. And obviously, smaller groups of animals don't require a whole lot. I mean, you can rotate them faster and across, smaller strips. Larger groups are going to have a little bit more consideration to have. But to your point about the graph paper, I literally set one of these up just the other day with a customer, and it was so easy because we just looked down and we just kind of developed a plan based on the aerial photograph. Mm-hmm. And to what Jeremy said, and the lane down the center, so we can get animals back to the barn or back to a watering area. That they are pie shaped. I've seen them done in all kinds of ways, up to including I've had them use the circle irrigation systems. where I subdivided into a pie shape, and the water is in the center and everybody has access to it, but closed off from other sections of the growth area. So yeah, I mean, there's just all kinds of creative ways you can do this, and you just have to trial and error it a little bit, and just kind of look at, again, like I mentioned earlier on, weather and the number of animals is all going to be a factor, and how fast the spring growth is occurring. And to keep this going all through the summer, the hotter it gets, the more necessity to have fresh water available. So digestion occurs naturally and normally, and everything is good. The health of the animal is completely maintained. So yeah, so design with purpose, design with water in mind, and think about plant growth and developing a good movement program that can be trial and error a little bit at the beginning, but once you get an idea of what your animals are going to do, just go for it and move them across.
Now, you say you're working with producers to kind of help them design what's going to work for them, help them make sure they have the right tools and technology. Are you predominantly working with commercial cattlemen? Are you working with seed stock producers? I know
Absolutely.
some conversations, a lot of times seed stock producers are going to be more apt to have more breeding groups if they're breeding in the summer. And sometimes that brings a challenge to rotational grazing. Like,
right.
That's something you see, or what are you kind of seeing on that front as far as, moving those breeding groups around?
Well, that's true. And it makes a bit of more of a challenge to separate those breeding groups. So you might have smaller designated pastures for smaller groups and things like that, and to keep them separate. And also we work with commercial folks as well. And it just kind of depends on the operation and how they can value, or how they intermingle those animals. So but yeah, high intensive groups and such is definitely a norm that we deal with. And you just simply have to create smaller pastures and smaller paddocks that can be moved differently than them all being commingled, like you said.
So are these typically like single strand cross fences? Are you doing multiple strands? Like, when you have cows and calves out there together, like what's working for producers to try and keep everything together?
Well, cows and calves, you can pretty much maintain an entire system with a single line of electric fencing going across. Now, calves may drift across the line, but they don't drift across for very long. They always come back to mom. So we do see that happening. But if the strategy is that the height of the wire is at about their head level, or just about their nose level, with them just looking straight ahead, that is typically a very effective way to keep them inside the space where mama is at. And once they learn or have been shocked, they will they'll respect the fence. And but there's always this necessity to get back to where mom is at. So they'll duck under if they get past and come right back to. And again, the whole idea is to have a great perimeter, so there's no risk of them getting out or in a different area. But yeah, we typically always see just a single line.
Now, sometimes when we're making changes in life or on ranches or on farms, whatever it may be, sometimes it takes a while to see the impact and see if it's worth doing. When you've helped different ranchers or cattle producers implement rotational grazing, do you feel like they notice the benefit, after the next year and that next growing season? Does it take 2, 3, 4 years? Like, what can cattle producers kind of mentally prepare for, once they kind of see these benefits of rotational grazing?
Well, one thing that we advise folks to do is to go ahead and weigh your animals before you put them on pasture, so you can get a kind of a benchmark of the production and the effectiveness of your rotational grazing. And then, because when they come back off, you can take another second weight and just kind of compare their average daily gain. Some folks will measure different groups in different parts of the farm, and different pastures, let's say, and understand what that growth is. So there's some experimental, you can definitely measure what's happening to your animals while they're on pasture, and especially after they come back. And so the ROI, the return on investment, is almost immediate, because if animals are growing at a higher rate than you would have to have paid to feed them differently, that's huge for us and huge for them, because gosh, they're taking advantage of the land, and you're being a good steward. They're healthy, they're moved before it's too late. It just makes complete sense when you start to look at, if you've got the property and the ability to rotational graze, it's just a huge win. So by season number 2, let's say you're number 1, the first season, just measuring what your input is, and then the second season you can make some different decisions on how maybe you might move them a little tighter. You might move them more often, let's say, based on what you've learned. But every situation is a little bit different, but for the most part, you're going to see a return on investment by season 2, and it's wonderful, because the plant growth is good. If you have a good wet season, obviously during drier periods, you really need to move them a lot faster, because you don't want it to get trampled and eaten down too quickly if there's less of a density. So a lot of factors go into the success of it, but it can be realized very shortly.
Now, you said, weigh your animals and have a measurement there. What about, taking a measurement for forage production, and checking that each year too? Is that something you recommend producers do?
Absolutely. See that all the time. So, yeah, I think you need to measure this. You need to measure your effectiveness all the time, and making sure, and that's the best way to do it, is measure the animal growth, and also the plant growth, as well as the animal input and conversion that you're seeing amongst your animals.
Well, great. Ray, is there anything else that you want to add or talk about while we're on this topic of grazing and trying to think spring, trying to maybe I'm having all these spring episodes to will it upon us or something, but is there anything else you really want to talk about?
Well, I just want to drive it home, because rotational grazing is huge, and it's an important practice, and you just carefully manage your pastures and provide that fresh water, and the health and productivity of a pasture can be improved. It's environmentally right to do this. And animal welfare is always a huge part of this, and making sure that they're safe and observed, and anything that you can do to improve their welfare is just absolutely key to their growth and success. So yeah, anytime you can, this is the best thing to do, and it's not expensive to do. It's just a few tools like that are needed to keep them going and get the highest yield from their conversion on your pastures.
Well, right. And like you just said, it's environmentally right, but from the people I've talked to, it's also economically right. And so when those two combine, why wouldn't you do it? Although, it is a change. So, but producers, if you're out there listening, ask for help, like I always say, because I always say cattle producers are Jacks and Jills of all trades.
Yep.
And sometimes we need to do a little bit better job of building up our team and asking for help. I know some cattle producers who have great teams and are great at that, but sometimes we just need to ask for a little help and guidance. But
we are all students here. We're all students of the industry, and we love to listen to success stories across the country, and we build on each other's experiences, and together we're building a better outcome here for cattle and conversion, and just better use of the land.
Well, awesome. Thanks for being on the show today, Ray. As always, it's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll link any materials, whether that's the tumble wheel, reels, all that information. I will make sure to link all of that in the show notes, either under the episode description, or if you are someone who likes to read the summaries, it'll be linked there as well. So,
all right, sounds good.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you for tuning in today and joining in on the conversation. Be sure to take this a step further and take the advice you learned and implement it on your operation. If you want to have a conversation about it, head over to my social media and send me a DM by following @CattleConvos and connecting with me there. Have a great day.